Hello, fellow rebel capitalists. Hope you're well. I wanted to go over a super cool chart from the Visual Capitalist that will help you understand why the global elite want you to be poor. Let's get right over to their website and check this out, and I'll give you my thoughts. And I think at the end of this video here in a couple minutes, you'll be able to connect the dots and better understand what motivates them. So here is this diagram, this chart. Super cool. It's super huge as well. Let me see if I can. I guess that is the actual size. Wow, it's huge. Okay, so energy, or the history of energy transitions. The economic and technological advances over the last 200 years have transformed how we produce and consume energy. Here's how global energy mix has evolved since 1800. All right. Now, this puts things into perspective, and it tells you how, I mean, even me, I'm sure all of us on this live stream right now just have tremendous recency bias where we just assume the world has always been like it is now, or the world that we grew up in. And if you look at the oil consumption, just even going back to 1950, I mean, the world is a pretty old place, believe it or not. And we've got history going back to what, 8,000 BC? So call it 10,000 years. And we've only really been where we are as far as, or even within the realm, we've only been in the same ballpark as where we are right now as far as per capita GDP, maybe since 1960, 70. I mean, just really the last, call it 50, 60 years. It's incredible. And so why am I referencing GDP instead of referencing the energy first? Because as you guys know, and from what my good friend Art Berman teaches us, energy is the economy. So if I had a chart of per capita GDP, and I've actually got one on my phone here. I should have brought it up for this video, but it wouldn't matter because it's identical. It's identical. Not you can look at a chart of nominal GDP, you can look at a chart of real GDP per capita in the West, and it's going to look identical to this. So what this means is, let's say that we had never found a source of energy other than what we were using back in 1800. So 1800, we were pretty much using what they call biomass for heat, which is basically dried cow dung. That's what that, I mean, just imagine that. I mean, that wasn't that long ago in the scope of human history. I mean, 200 years ago, we were using cow dung as the main source of energy to heat our homes, to cook. I mean, imagine that. Oh, honey, I've got to, go grab some steak for dinner. Just can you round up some dried cow dung so we can cook the steak? I mean, it's just unbelievable, isn't it? But my point is this: if we never would have found another energy source other than basically cow dung, the per capita GDP would be very similar today to what it was back then. The standard of living would be very similar. The rate of poverty, the per capita GDP, again, would be almost identical. Might be a little bit better, but not much. The average life expectancy would be pretty much the same. You would not have had much progress at all in the standard of living. Then along comes coal and allows us. So why is this? I mean, a lot of people don't really connect the dots here, because if you're looking at things in very simple terms, right? It's that simple economy I always use for my whiteboard videos, where you've got a farmer that grows wheat, a farmer that grows corn, and another one that grows cows. And let's say those are the only things that a society needs to sustain itself. What happens is those three farmers become more productive to the point where they produce far more than they consume. So, what does this do? This allows other people within society to be able to do other things than have to grow corn, wheat, or cattle. They can be teachers. They can be an entrepreneur. They can create some good or service. They can become a doctor. They can do other things because they don't have to spend 10 hours a day growing their own food, because farmer Fred or farmers Freds or the farmer Freds, they're growing so much food because they become so productive because of machinery. Or why? What does the machinery run on? Energy. Think about it this way. How productive, or how much more could those farmers back in the 1800s, or even today, how much more could they produce than they consume if our only energy source was still dried cow dung? You see, this is why energy is the economy. Because every step you get where you get a higher energy density with the source of energy that you're using, it allows people to produce even more than they consume, or become more productive, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And then you're able to transport those goods more productively. Like if we just had coal, well, then we couldn't have diesel, we couldn't have jet fuel, we couldn't have these things that allows us to transport these goods all across the globe, right? And if we could subcontract out the production of some of the stuff that we don't do well to, let's say, Mexico, other countries, then that allows us to be more productive, just like the farmer Freds producing far more than they consume. And the more they do produce, the more it allows other people to not have to produce the cattle, corn, and cotton, and to do other things. And therefore, the standard of living increases. So does GDP, economic output per capita GDP. And when we move from cow dung to coal, it allows society to grow because we have a better source of energy. It allows society to become richer. Then when we go from coal to oil, same thing. Then you add on natural gas, byproduct of oil. We have a more plentiful source of energy. Therefore, we don't have to worry about heating our homes. We don't have to worry about going out collecting cow dung. All we have to do is turn the thermostat on the wall, and all of a sudden our house is hot. Well, think about how much time and energy, personal energy, that frees up to do other things. Think about how productive you would be right now in your life if you had to grow your own food, or you had to somehow figure out a way to heat your own house. Like you had to do that yourself. Like you wouldn't have time to do anything else. So again, the point I'm trying to make, as we get denser energy sources, this allows us to divert our personal energy into other things and be more productive. Society gets richer, the standard of living increases. So the global elite look at this and say, well, we live in a world that is constrained. We don't have unlimited resources. Therefore, at a certain point, these resources will go away. The energy sources will go away. I mean, look at oil. We've really only had it for the last, call it 100 years or so. And, you know, coal is going to run out. And if oil runs out, the natural gas, I guess, to a certain degree runs out. And then nuclear, well, we can't do that because, you know, that's bad for the environment. And everything is under the guise of, well, this is bad for the environment. This is their way of spinning. You know, this is their way of manipulating you to get society at large to do what they want. And their end goal here is to reduce the level of consumption, reduce GDP, reduce the standard of living, i.e., make you poor. Because if they're able to make you poor, then, or if they're maybe looked at it from a different angle, if they're able to reduce the amount of energy you consume, then this is, and whether it's in the name of climate change or whatever, again, however they spin it, their concern really isn't climate change. It's the fact that you are consuming too much energy. And if you are consuming more energy, that means there's less energy for them to consume. So, like my good friend Chris Martenson says, they want you to take cold showers the rest of your life so they can continue to fly around the world in their Gulfstream private jet. This is how the game is played. And so they see things as a zero-sum game, where you and I, rebel capitalists, we would say, okay, we've got a problem here. We need energy to continue to increase exponentially if we want to continue with our increasing our economic activity, increasing productivity, which means people getting richer, improving the standard of living. Well, we live in a world of limited, scarce resources with alternative uses, including energy. So how are we going to solve this problem? The global elite say, well, we just need fewer people. It goes back to that Malthusian type of view of the world. They say we need fewer people and we need to control things. And once we control things, we need to reduce people's consumption. And we need to lower their standard of living. We need to make them poor so we can continue to be rich. This is their mentality. And see, the reason their default isn't, well, we should let the free market handle this, because they don't believe in the free market. Why? Because this would completely destroy their worldview, because their worldview is that they're smarter than everyone else. They're the intelligentsia. They're the enlightened few. Like that gal said with the Club of Rome the other day. She said, well, the people in this room, we have obviously achieved a higher level of consciousness. You see, so if you had that belief system, then how could you assume that the dumb rubes in society could solve a problem that you haven't been able to solve, or that you can't solve? That's impossible. There's no way, because the dumb rubes, they're inferior to you. Therefore, it doesn't matter if there's 7 billion of them. They're not going to be able to solve this problem. You're the only one that's going to be able to solve this problem. And since you can't figure it out, you're going to use force. And you're just going to force people, condition them, whatever, by whatever means necessary, I guess, to consume less. Because that's the only way that humanity is going to survive in a world of limited resources with alternative uses. See, this is their worldview. Where, again, as rebel capitalists, what we do is we look at this problem and say, yeah, that's a big deal. That's an issue. So let's allow the free market to solve this problem. Let's allow prices to go up. You see, Milton Friedman talked about this back in the mid-70s when the Club of Rome came out with their paper in 1972, Limits to Growth. And Friedman started talking about this. I saw some speeches he gave on YouTube. I believe there may be 74, 75, where he addressed their paper directly. And he said, well, what you got to do is you got to let the free market work, and you've got to let the price mechanism take over. So how would the price mechanism solve this? Well, prices would go way up. Like if you didn't have OPEC, if you didn't have a cartel, if you had just, again, free market pricing with oil and energy, price goes way, way up, then what does that do? That automatically reduces consumption. So the market would reduce consumption. Klaus doesn't have to through his draconian measures. But see, what the central planners want to do is they want to reduce the price so they continue to get reelected, but then they just want to force you to use less. And then, of course, this creates all of these unintended consequences that just make things worse. Meanwhile, the problem isn't being solved. So again, prices go up, this reduces consumption, and this increases the incentive to find alternate sources of energy. I mean, just think about your own life. Let's just say that gas was $20 a gallon. Would you buy an electric car, assuming you could afford it? Probably. You definitely have a bigger incentive. If gas was $20 a gallon, would you use more of it or less of it? Pretty simple. when you make things that basic. But this is the way you solve the problem. And you allow, and the fact that there's exponentially more people, well, that's a good thing. That's not a bad thing, because that means there's exponentially more people, more scientists, more entrepreneurs that are in the world that can tackle this problem. And two heads are greater than, are better than one. And so, think about how many scientists we have in the world today compared to even 1930 or 1800, right? And think about all the accumulated information we have. So you let the price mechanism take care of the supply demand equation, and you let the entrepreneurs, you don't demonize them, for heaven's sakes. You don't call them greedy capitalists. You don't come out with a windfall profit tax. That's the opposite of what you want to do. And then you sit back and say, okay, we have a problem, and the only way that we're going to solve it is with the free market. See, this is, again, this constrained view of the world that I always talk about, that Thomas Sowell illustrated so well in his book. Was it The Conflict of Visions? I believe it is. And that, the way I would look at this is, yeah, you got a problem. And let's just assume this was so dire that if you didn't solve the problem within, let's just assume 20 years, the world comes to an end. The way I would look at this is I'd say, okay, we got to put all our money on the free market, because the free market doesn't solve it. It won't get solved. And then we're done. It's game over. What most people do is say, oh, no, my gosh, this is way too important to leave to the free market. We've got to have the central planners just basically put everyone in jail and not allow each other out of the house. I would argue that that is going to most likely be the end of society even faster than climate change would in 20 years, assuming that was true. So again, it's like having it's like a basketball game where the score is tied, let's say, or you're down by 1 point and they get like a technical foul, the other team, and you have the choice of putting in who gets to shoot those free throws to, number one, tie the game, or number two, win if you make both. What you're going to do, what you've got to do is you've got to decide, okay, who's my best player? And you got to put out that player. And then you're riding on their shoulders. If they miss both free throws, I mean, we live in an imperfect world with imperfect people. And that's the best you could do, right? If they make both free throws, then great. You put your best player out there. And our best player is the free market. You see, our worst player is the central planners. That's my point. But people feel like, for whatever reason, because it's counterintuitive, that this problem is so dire that we have to have the central planners do this, and they have to force it into action. But again, what they don't understand is that's just going to make things worse, even if you feel like it's making it better. And so then from the global elite, they love this because you're giving them all the power and control that they desire. And it's a win-win for them. So going back to the title of the video, this one chart, especially if you had another line on here that showed the GDP growth and population growth, which would be identical, by the way, to this chart of energy usage. This is why the global elite want you to be poor. Because if you're poor, then that means most likely GDP or economic output has gone down. And if economic output has gone down, the consumption of energy has gone down. Your standard of living has gone down. And that's what they want. They want consumption to be less than it is today, dramatically less than. I mean, just again, look at this chart and just assume that we eliminated this whole thing right here of oil. What do you think would happen to GDP? What do you think would happen to the world's population? How many hundreds of millions, if not billions, of people do you think would die if we just eliminated this section of energy right here, from right there to right there? Even natural gas, from right here to right here. I mean, you guys know the answer to that. So what we need to do is recognize this, and this makes it very. This gives you a great framework to analyze whatever it is they say today, or have said in the past, or say in the future. Once you take it down to its basics and understand, they want three things: they want you to consume less, they want less people or lower birth rate, and then they want power and control to make those first two things happen. All right, guys, enjoy the rest of your afternoon. As always, make sure that you're standing up for freedom, liberty, free market capitalism, and I'll see you in the next